I'm Nawodi Samarasiri, a PhD candidate at the Department of Advertising at Faculty of Business, and my supervisors are Professor Wickramasekara and Dr. Alvin Tan. They are the co-author of this working paper. So the topic is fostering sustainable international destination attachment by firms in an emerging market. This is actually one of our working papers. And before I go to my content, I'll quickly show you some pictures. So if I ask a question from you, whether do you like to visit these locations, I know the answer is yes. But if it's during COVID-19, the majority says no. That is why there was a huge drop in the global tourism after COVID-19. One good example is Sri Lanka as one of best performing tourism destination. You can see from the image that from 2019 to 2021, what was happened? Because 2019, there was a huge contribution to the GDP and again to the export sector of Sri Lanka. So as you can see in the travel and tourism to GDP, it was 10.5%. And then by 2021, it was 3.1%. And again, for the export sector, it was 1.99% in 2021, but it was in 2019, it was 24%, which is a significant drop. So I found from the, again, before we go to that, you can see the leisure and business. So how business spending moved to leisure spending, and again, domestic versus international spending. You can see in 2019, the international spending was higher, but in 2021, the domestic spending is higher in this Sri Lankan context. So this is the one of emerging markets that we found for our research. So then we recognized from the research studies, there is a need for sustainable tourism to avoid or maybe to reduce the circumstances that will arise from such crises. So the reason is if we have more economic diversification with ecological offerings, the vulnerability will be less. And again, there is a more resilience to avoid these circumstances. And again, if there is a sustainable tourism, that means the community is more engaged and they have more empowerment, which means there is a more there is a high income diversification. That means they are more stable during a crisis. And again, you can see if there is a sustainable tourism, that means the negative impact to the ecological system is low. And again, they have some contingency plans and again, crisis management strategies. And again, they can improve the ability to face these crises. And again, cultural preservations. You know, different countries, they have nice cultural history. And when it comes to Sri Lanka, they have nice cultural history. I will explain how it worked in the next few slides. So if we can perceive the culture and the heritage of a country to this tourism, that means we can attract more responsible and discerning tourists for our destinations, which is sustainable. And again, long-term planning. So if we can plan with considering the well-being of the future in the sustainable tourism, that means our destination is sustained for a longer time for tourists. So then, before I go to the key idea of my project, actually, so this is one slide I made for you to give a brief understanding of my project. And again, the more feedback and more questions are welcome for me to incorporate sustainability into this study. So I'll explain my project to you. So in here, you can see in your left-hand side, there are some tourists. And again, in the right-hand side, you can see the tourism destination. So when I take the Sri Lanka as the tourism destination, you can see there are some SMEs within the tourism destination. So among them, I selected ecotourism SMEs. The reason is that when it comes to global ecotourism SMEs, the contribution to the GDP is 195 USD billion to the tourism industry, and they have focused it more in 2032. Likewise, I selected among the tourism SMEs in Sri Lanka, I'd go for ecotourism SMEs. So for what? To improve the sustainable destination attachment to ensure the sustainable tourism. So how I can improve this sustainable destination attachment from these SMEs? The reason is, if we have a proper place attachment, that means a belonging of sense for belongingness from the tourist to a destination, that means these tourists are loyal and they are sustained for a longer time period. So then, there are numerous studies conducted for this for the destination attachment, not really for sustainable destination attachment. There are limited research for sustainable destination attachment. However, there are a lot of research studies for destination attachment considering the tourist perspective. That means considering the demand perspective, not from the supply perspective. So in here, my interest is into international business. So I focus these SMEs and I wanted to recognize how these SMEs can improve sustainable destination attachment for a sustainable tourism. So in that, I recognize there are some nice studies and recent trends for dynamic capabilities within SMEs, and they have recognized how SMEs can sense, seize, and transform their skills for competitive advantage, considering internal and external factors. So I recognize how I can incorporate dynamic capabilities of these SMEs to enhance the sustainable destination attachment. And again, there's another novelty I found. When it comes to dynamic capabilities, there are numerous studies conducted in this tourism sector, especially regarding crisis management. And again, there are some studies for the competitive advantage to tourist interaction, but there is a limited research studies for sustainable destination attachment. And again, their decisions are influencing by the SME firms. So in here, I assumed these SMEs firms are the collection of SME managers. So there are different factors that influence the decisions of SME managers. So how these factors will influence these dynamic capabilities and thereby how it can improve the sustainable destination attachment. Again, I did not only focus into this one set of model, but I wanted to incorporate two competitive models where in one perspective, I look at the SMEs and how they impact on the sustainable destination attachment. And then from the tourist perspective, whether this is proved. Because from the tourist perspective, we can recognize the dynamic capabilities that the SMEs will provide are really ensuring their sustainable destination attachment. So this is actually the project. From that, I recognize the novelty for this study. That means the novelty in linking dynamic capabilities and the sustainability of international destinations. And again, individual attitudes. That means the SME managers and mindset of them, such as curiosity and open-mindedness, affect their capacity for dynamic capability and sustainable attachment to a destination. And again, my novelty is to focus on the dynamic capabilities of SMEs and again, incorporating search methods on dynamic capabilities. So I have a moderating variable to recognize how the search methods, for an example, passive and active search methods, how this will moderate the factors and the dynamic capabilities when we improve the sustainable destination attachment. So this is the research problem. How do cognitive, behavioral, and organizational factors mediated by dynamic capabilities of eco-tourism SMEs influence destination attachment, with a focus on how the moderating variables of research methods interact with these factors and dynamic capabilities. So within that discussion, you can see the model that I created. So there, as I said you, there are two competing models. One is to the SME managers in Sri Lanka. The other one is to the tourists. So in here, SME managers, I will pick 75 ecotourism SME managers. And the assumption is managers of the SME represent the firm. And then sustainable destination attachment will be analyzed from the manager's perspective. And in here, we will go with the psychometric test. And then from the tourist perspective, there will be an interview-based questionnaire, which is qualitative, and I will use NVivo 10 for thematic analysis. So then the main question for us was how we can incorporate sustainability into this study, because we look at the sustainable destination attachment, but how we can incorporate sustainability. Because Sri Lanka, when it comes to Sri Lanka, sustainability is not new for them because it was deeply rooted in their historical culture and their constructions. For example, if I look at these informations are from Dararatna 2018. So water management system, which was sophisticated with reservoirs, canals, and the small tanks, showing a deep understanding of importance of water because they understood the importance of water for their agriculture, and the water management system was incredible. And then you can see community use, how this water system was balanced with the community used. And again, their sacred and profane harmony, that means that is extended beyond the traditional, religious practices. That means they combine the sacred beliefs with the spirituality, and again, the survival and the land use. And again, when it comes to the land use and agriculture, villagers had a thoughtful approach to land use, ensuring cultivation areas not only for production, and they respected natural features of the landscape. For an example, they had paddy fields, threshing floors, sacred groves, all aligned with this natural system. And again, the community-based the practices, because they had the system was operated with sharing, collective ownership, sense of community, and all these are with shared purpose. So then from water to sacred places, they contributed to a balanced lifestyle for sustainable way of life. And again, the waste, they considered waste as a resource, and they had circularity for waste, and they reused it with the community because they had responsible consumption within the society, so which is also sustainable. And then cultural practices and beliefs, they had cultural practices, rituals, beliefs that were intervened with sustainable living. So that means they considered the earth as the great mother, and they incorporate Buddhist teaching into their cultural practices and to their day-to-day life. And that is their cultural practices we can use for their sustainable tourism. In my study, I will explain how I will incorporate these sustainability practices of Sri Lankans into sustainable tourism in Sri Lankan destination in the next slide. So again, the simplicity and thrift culture, because they had a simple lifestyle, and there was a nice word that they use like Arapiri Masma, and they have separate places to store the food for the next day, and that means they consider save for tomorrow, and they're related. That was related to their mindset of sustainability, and their overconsumption, maybe their excess. What they will do to the excess, all those depended with the Buddhism teaching that they had in their culture. And then there's partial organization for walking and low-tech transport. If you can see some of the footpath, without harming the environment, they had created nice walking path and their low-tech transport, which ensure low energy consumption lifestyles. And again, if there are settlement patterns for certain settlements, without this path, they have designed it with consciousness of the distance and the time. So you can see the structure of a village that they have created, how the water flows within the agricultural lands, and then within the community balance. So everything was there in their construction methods. And again, there are some other findings that I found. Among them, one good example I found, they use temple and then the city wall and the agricultural community as a ring to ensure the supporting weave among each other. So that is also one example. You can see some of the findings. So then how I can incorporate their their sustainable practices into my study. So as I explained to you, I will look at the sustainable destination attachment. And then this is from the SME's perspective, small, medium enterprise perspective. So then examine how Sri Lankan's past sustainability strategies have influenced the cognitive processes of ecotourism SME managers and whether they draw inspiration for their decisions from the conventional sustainable techniques. In here, I will look at how they draw inspiration from the sustainable strategies which are apart from conventional sustainable strategies within Sri Lanka. And again, examine their actions are consistent with Sri Lankan sustainable culture, and if so, how this affects the attachment to the location. So how they can incorporate this culture to the behavior when they take the decisions. And again, the third one is, I explained you that they had shared ownership, shared resources. So then organizational culture with shared ownership, community involvement, and sustainable resources management are guiding concepts adopted by these organizations from Sri Lankan culture. And then again, dynamic capabilities and adaptability. Examine how past sustainable approaches have impacted the dynamic capabilities of ecotourism SME managers, such as learning and flexibility. Examine whether these capacities are influenced by a long-term sustainable viewpoint that drawn inspiration from Sri Lankan's rich cultural legacy. And again, cultural influence on decision-making. In here, I will look at the cultural values derived from the environmentally friendly customs of traditional Sri Lankan communities can be incorporated in the thought process of this ecotourism SME management. And again, I told you there is another competing model that I examined from the tourist perspective. So we can evaluate how tourist choice of destination is affected by Sri Lankan sustainability culture. So then the next one is knowledge transfer from indigenous practices. So examine how much Sri Lankan indigenous knowledge and customs are incorporated in the cognitive processes of ecotourism SME managers, and then examine whether any deliberate attempts are being made to incorporate sustainable cultural practices into organizational plans. And then community involvement and destination management attachment. Evaluate how community involvement relates to the organizational elements that influence destination attachment. Examine whether behaviors that are shaped after Sri Lankan's traditional villages, such as shared ownership and community involvement, strengthen ties to the destination. So this is how I incorporate this sustainability concept of Sri Lanka into my study. So here I come to the conclusion. So my main study is looking at the two competitive models from the perspective of SMEs and the tourists. And then there are some novelties from the current study where I look at the sustainability of international destination, and then how the individual mindset and the attitudes relates with the dynamic capabilities to improve the destination attachment. And again, how dynamic capabilities of SMEs create this destination attachment. And again, how the behavioral, organizational, cognitive factors influence the dynamic capabilities while moderated by the search efforts for sustainable destination attachment. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, you can raise now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nawodi, for your very interesting research. That was wonderful to listen to. Thank you for your time today. I will just let anyone know who has arrived into the conference recently that if you would like to ask any questions, please put those into the question and answer section of the Zoom. The chat is disabled, but you can put your questions in there and I will read them out. I'll start with a question though. I was just wondering, and it might be outside the bounds of your research, but from a consumer perspective, would you see that there are any barriers to people travelling overseas in terms of air travel being considered non-sustainable? Does that become the first barrier almost to sustainable travel? Is that we need to get on a plane to go and experience another place?
Yes, there are some internal barriers and again external barriers when it comes to travel and transportation. Yes, from the tourist perspective, that can be a major issue. But when it comes to their, so this is actually from this you explained from the crisis, during the crisis or after crisis?
That's a good question. I would probably say after, because I think we've become a little bit more aware of what it means to travel by plane now.
Yes. So that
putting the expense aside.
Yeah, that'll be a great challenge for any tourist. Again, when it comes to destination attachment, they had some the elements like cognitive, and affective. So we actually need to recognize to which point this question will align, because that may be to their behavioral aspect. So that needs to be considered. Yeah, thank you for that.
And I have one more question. Are there any universal principles that you can see SMEs applying in other countries, perhaps with emerging sustainable tourism industries? Do you think that there might be some principles that can be applied elsewhere?
Yes. In here, there are some theories we found, like theory of planned behavior and dynamic capability theory, because dynamic capability theory has a long history and it evolved throughout many years. And within that, the recent recognition for dynamic capability theory is how SMEs can sense, and transform their capabilities. So this can be applied to any context in the world. And again, theory of planned behavior, one of the research papers that I studied, Mario 2019, they have explained how theory of planned behavior for destination attachment can be applied for any context.
Sorry, I was speaking muted there. Thank you, Nawodi. Thank you very much for your time today. I think we might now move